Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Next Practices Weekly Call. We're really excited to have you all on the call today. As you come in and join us, please let us know where you're calling in from. Introduce yourself in the chat. We love to just stay engaged with you in the chat during the call. So as you have questions in the call, please feel free to share those in the chat as well. And we'd love to keep that conversation going. We can move on to the next slide, Kiara. For our Next Practices Weekly Call and at the foundation of all of our research here at I4CP, we're excited to talk about the people practices that drive high performance, and we use those to help you see what's coming around the corner. Next slide, Kiara. We define high performance here at I4CP by four main factors: revenue growth, market share, profitability, and customer satisfaction over a 5-year period. So our research focus is oriented around that. We're always trying to figure out what high performance organizations do differently and figuring out how those practices correlate to market performance. And finally, we're excited to share many of our I4CP members on this list. We have such an amazing group in our community here, and we're excited to see many of you on that call today. Again, let's stay active on that chat for our members and our non-members. Let's just stay connected throughout this call today. If you're not in membership yet, definitely reach out to us and figure out how you can join membership today. And a little preview into some of our upcoming research. We currently have a pulse survey out in the market right now on employers and LGBTQ+ legislation just in time for Pride Month. So I know Kiara is going to drop a link to that pulse survey in the chat, and we'd love it if you took some time and shared what your organization is doing with that. And then we have one more pulse survey that we'd like to share with you. And so, Kiara, if you want to advance to the next slide, thank you. So by 2030, we are estimating that there's going to be a global talent shortage of more than 85 million people. And while there's many factors that are going to contribute to the rise in employment inactivity, especially among workers between 55 to 74, and those really factor into that global labor supply and demand gap, I4CP has recently partnered with the Age Friendly Institute, which provides worker advocacy and certifies employers that offer age-friendly workplaces to explore talent issues, opportunities, and organizational practices related to older workers. So if you'd like a copy of that recently released brief, and this is just for our members, so you have to be logged into your membership at I4CP to get access to that. We'll drop that link for you to be able to download that brief in the chat here, and you'll get some key findings from that study, as well as understanding how to better engage and fully support those workers that are aged 55 to 74. And so you can definitely head over to our website to download that, or just follow the link that Kiara is going to drop into that chat soon. And if you can just push us on to the next slide, Kiara, thank you so much. Excited to see so many people calling in from all over the country today. Joining me as my co-facilitators on today's call, we have Jackie Robertson, who is the chair of the I4CP CDO board and the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at the Cleveland Clinic. And we also have Eric Davis from I4CP. He's our creative director and senior editor at I4CP, joining us for this call today. We do have more upcoming calls in our Next Practices Weekly series. So if you don't have these on your calendar, make sure that you do. Coming up next to kick off June, we have the Next Practices Weekly call on fostering people and sustainability and a learning mindset at Zurich. And joining us from there, we have Terry Hart, the Chief Learning Officer at Zurich North America. Later on in the month for our Next Practices Weekly and Talent Acquisition call, we have the Agile Talent Acquisition using a capacity building model with Grace Niwa, who's the Vice President of Global Acquisition and Talent Intelligence and Early Career at Vertex Pharmaceuticals. And then rounding out this next set of calls is the Integrating Wellbeing into the Targets Talent Program with Kiara Fernandez, who is the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer and Senior Vice President of HR and Courtney Richardson, Senior Vice President of Pay and Benefits at Target. And with that, I hope you get these calls on your calendar. We're excited again to have you on today's call. And I'm going to turn it over to Jackie to introduce our incredible speaker today.
All right, Nina, thank you so much. And thank you for all who have joined us, as Nina said, from so many places. I see someone just joined us from Brazil. So welcome to all of you. I'm so excited to be here today. We have a wonderful speaker, Geraldine White. She's our guest for today. And so Geraldine, first of all, just thank you for taking the time to join us. For those of you who don't know, excuse me, Geraldine White is the Chief Diversity Officer for the Publicis Group. And she is also a new member of the I4CP Chief Diversity Officer Board. So first and foremost, Geraldine, welcome. We're delighted to have you today.
Jackie, thank you so much. Happy to be here and enter into this conversation and share this space with you.
Absolutely. So one of the things we like for this audience to be able to do, Geraldine, is get to know our speakers a little better. And when I think about universal language, no matter where you're from, I think of two things. I think of music and I think of food. So we probably won't be talking much about food today, unless you want to, but certainly want to talk about the song that you chose. So Toast by Coffee. It certainly jazzed me up first thing during the beginning of this call. So tell us a little bit about why that song resonates with you. Why did you choose that for today?
Sure. So first of all, it absolutely is a mood lifter, and I did see you moving to the music, and that in and of itself brought me joy. I think the song itself is really focused on gratitude, particularly in the face of adversity. I will say that doing this work, there absolutely is. There's weight that comes with it. You're navigating, meeting people where they are, dealing consistently with the face of adversity, and the work is challenging in very meaningful ways, but you still have to always sort of maintain a perspective of staying centralized. For me, I find it beneficial in sort of staying in that sort of spirit of gratitude and remaining centered. For me, I think it's a tremendous opportunity to be able to have this level of impact and engagement and talent, and the opportunity to even meet people where they are on their journey is a gift. So that's really what the song symbolizes to me. It's that reminder.
I love it. I appreciate that. And one of the things I do want to talk about is some of the impact that you're having in your organization, especially as it relates to this study around older workers. So we're going to get into that in just a minute. But first, let's familiarize this audience with Publicis Group. Like, who are you? I think a lot of our members probably are familiar with some of the name brands under Publicis Group, but can you tell us a little bit more about the company and what you do?
Happy to. So Publicis Group was initially founded in 1926. It's a French-based organization, and today it exists as what is now the second largest communications group in the world. Our agencies within Publicis Group are everything from media to creative to digital, health in the advertising industry, as well as management consulting firms like Sapient and Epsilon. So when you think of the Leo Burnett's and the Sachis of the world, those are all part of the Publicis Group network. We're organized into solution hubs, really to facilitate greater connectivity across communications, media, as well as the consulting models. And we really, realizing that we live in a digital first world, create platforms and greater connectivity for talent and for our consumers and clients.
Appreciate that. Thank you for that additional description. And, I don't like to make any assumptions. Many of us on this call today work in the capacity of chief diversity officers, but I don't want to make the assumption that we all do the same things, although what you said definitely resonates, and I think that we all carry a lot of weight. And I loved your statement around making sure that we continue to feel gratitude and continue to remain centered, because this is no easy work that we do. But I'd like to better understand, what are your responsibilities? What are some of the key things that you're taking on at Publicis as a chief diversity officer?
Thank you for asking that. I always have a certain amount of respect and try to give a lift to CDOs, no matter what function capacity they're operating in, because I think that there are shared challenges. But for me specifically at Publicis Group, I lead the organization's efforts toward really towards having a more inclusive climate as an organization. So we have a centralized practice, our talent engagement and inclusion team that drives these efforts. That's the team that I lead. And it's everything from our policies, our practices, our systems and tools, really how we foster belonging for all talent identities and create that sense of belonging amidst long-term systemic change. Our work really focuses on not just our landscape of business resource groups, but what are the things that we can do to realizing that none of these conversations are new about really creating greater equity and what the experiences of talent are in the day-to-day, but how are we bringing the same things that we bring to our clients in terms of change management, governance, systems thinking in application to this work to really move the needle.
Appreciate that. Thank you. So some of you might be familiar with the I4CP research that Nina referred to early on. And I know that you actually had a conversation, Geraldine, with Carol Morrison, who has actually led some of this research on older workers. And so for those of you on the call who are not familiar with it, this was a study conducted in partnership with the Age Friendly Institute. And that's an organization that certifies employers who are committed to being the best places to work for individuals age 50 plus. And when you think about what the global shortage is going to be like in terms of talent by the year 2030, I was so impressed to hear that Publicis is intentional about their work on this and around multi-generational focus and that focus on belonging. So talk a little bit about the age-friendly employer certification. I don't know if it's this exclusive thing, credential, or how do you earn it? But talk a little bit about that. Familiarize us with it. I understand only 4% of organizations surveyed have actually pursued it. So I think, Geraldine, you might be on the leading edge of something that we certainly on this call want to know more about. So tell us a little bit more about this certification, what goes into it. Talk to us.
Absolutely. So even in leaning a bit first into your last question about the breadth of this, in truly creating an inclusive organizational climate, you have to really meet the needs of all talent identities. You have to have a focus on intersectionality. Whatever your particular ideals or your goals that you set out for, you still have to deal with things that impact a number of our industries in terms of power structures, really trying to navigate a multi-generational workforce and creating that ongoing connectivity and what the experience through the talent life cycle of talent is, at the same time that you're managing sort of this constant onslaught of things that are outside of your organizational locus of control, so to speak, when you think about the pandemic, when you think about societal impacts of ongoing violence against communities, and really being able to sort of navigate all of those things at the same time. And so as we look at meeting the needs of talent, one of the areas, to your point, that really not a lot of organizations have really focused on this area, having the focus for older workers, more experienced workers in our industry and in our organization is extremely important. And the notion of ageism, whether it is for junior talent or no matter what career or life stage you're in, is something that we have to really be cautious about. Our work ultimately, no matter what identity we're talking about, is to mirror the market. In terms of who the consumer is. And so in that focus, we had to have also a concerted effort in terms of how we were looking at individuals who are 50 plus in our organization. This does fall into our BRG landscape as well. So all of this work and the gaining the certification is done in direct partnership with our SAGES BRG that focuses on talent in the organization that are 45 plus. And so our BRGs truly are BRGs in that they have a business focus and are funded by the talent engagement and inclusion team. And this becomes part of the work that we do with SAGES in terms of what are the policies and things we need to do to support talent. And by virtue of that is how we were able to get the certification.
I love the fact that you have a BRG focused on this as well. And when I think about, so I have to make this comment. When I think about older workers, I just want to say older is always relative, and it's at least 20 years older than you are. So, you know, Carol, I know you did the research on this, but 50 plus somehow just doesn't seem like older. But talk to us a little bit, Geraldine, around how do you get this certification? I mean, did you leverage your BRG group stages to do that? Did you lead that? How do you get this certification for any organizations that might be interested in going down that same path?
For us, it's done in partnership with SAGES. SAGES as a BRG helps absolutely with the insights from talent in terms of how do we best meet the needs of talent across any number of identities, and SAGES in particular is for those who are 45 plus in the organization. So the insights and understanding of what the ongoing needs, what the challenges might be, things that might come up around how are we sort of dispelling any sort of encouragement about individuals raising their hand to say like, hey, I think I might want to retire, or how are we offering mobility? We look closely at the things that we already have as an organization. For example, we have a proprietary platform called Marcel that really focuses on connectivity across the organization. Leverage it at the top of COVID to save a lot of jobs. Because we were able to do job postings for individuals and create greater connectivity across our brands in every part of the organization to offer up roles for individuals who might have otherwise had to be let go from the organization. So with that same tool set, we're always looking at how does this apply to other aspects of the organization, and mobility is one of them. Being able to, if someone says like, hey, I'm ready for my next act, I won't call it second or third, but I want to do something different. Maybe I'm not ready to retire. Maybe I want to do something part-time. It's leveraging those same platforms and what we have available to talent to support even what comes up from an identity or life stage basis.
I think that's brilliant. I think it's brilliant that you are really leading edge on this curve. I mean, the fact that only 4% of the organizations surveyed have really pursued this, I think you're really onto something. So tell us about any particular business goals or objectives, other than, I think, a stronger retention of talent that you had in mind when you first partnered with the Age Friendly Institute.
So it definitely leans into all those things. I think beyond it being a helpful measure in and of itself, it absolutely helps us to really demonstrate our commitment to greater inclusion and equity. And I think in particular, since 2020, there's been such amazing focus specifically on certain aspects of the DE&I landscape, but you can't focus on any one thing without focusing on all of it. And really this sort of being not looking at this as sort of an edge case. I mean, the truth of the matter is that as we look at this landscape globally, like all of us are heading towards, if we're not already past it, speaking from myself in this conversation, my oldest child is 28 years old. So we are all, this is all a conversation that everyone needs to have. And about the things that impact everyone, conversations around aging or getting older, as well as mental health and wellness, they're all very, very connected. So I think an additional measure is that our clients are also interested in holding us accountable. And in terms of how we show up, how we mirror the market. And I think one of the great things about SAGES in particular, and in our partnership, the policies that we're able to look at developing or launching, it definitely helps us in our overarching strategy, which is how does this work show up in our organization to begin with, but also in the marketplace, in what we call our workplace to marketplace approach.
I love it. And I love the integrated approach that you're focused on. You're absolutely right. It doesn't just affect one pillar, it affects all of them across the organization. So I'm going to open this up for questions in a minute, Geraldine. I have one more question for you before we open it up for question. And also just one thing I want the audience to start thinking about, and please feel free to come off chat and comment on anything that you all might be doing with regard to multi-generational talent, that focus specifically as it has to do with creating a greater sense of belonging for your talent. So Those of you on the call, I certainly want to make sure that you're thinking about this question. And Geraldine, I have one more question for you before we open it up.
Sure.
I'm curious about what kinds of reactions you got from leaders in your organization when you pitched this whole certification process. And then also, what do your employees think about it?
So we actually have continued to get a lot of positive reaction and engagement from our leaders, which is necessary in sort of that leadership role modeling in order to really see change in the organization. You know, at Publicis Groupe, since its inception, the model has been Vive la différence, which means our differences are what make us better and stronger and more impactful. So looking at the notion of having a multi-generational workforce and where there might be differences of perspective, layering and experience, et cetera, and that intersectional perspective, really leadership saw as a part of that. Talent has also responded very favorably to it. I know that some organizations will have something based BRG or ERG focused on life stage, and maybe it is specifically multi-generational. We have found that we have a landscape of 16 BRGs, SAGES is one of them, but we developed a cross BRG leadership council so that the leads of all of the BRGs come together to be able to collaborate. And so we can have very intersectional conversations. So when we're looking at Women's History Month, that conversation isn't void of women who are trans, and talking about all women. So when we're talking about the experience in the workplace, BRG with the SAGES BRG, as well as our Gen Next BRG, which is for more entry level and or younger talent, that conversation in terms of the similarities, learnings, and things that can happen, and really how we achieve greater collaboration all becomes a part of the conversation.
That is brilliant. So I love the fact that you had such an incredible response from leadership. I also love the fact that you leverage all of the BRGs, the heads of those BRGs, to have conversations, for example, on women. I mean, what powerful perspectives can come from trans groups, military groups, etc. So absolutely brilliant. At this point, I want to pause for any questions that have come up in the chat, Nina.
Absolutely. Well, you're definitely getting a lot of admiration in the chat, Geraldine. A lot of people are very, very impressed by your work. I've got two questions to share out for you. So the first one is from Robert Oppenmeyer. He's wondering how y'all engage a worker who has great skills and is ready to reduce responsibility and time worked. Do you have a plan around something like that?
Yeah, we're actually partnering with SAGES on some policy development that we're looking to launch later this year that is specifically around that, really being able to engage. So on the Marcel platform, I mentioned everyone has a profile where you're able to share your skill sets, your interests. You're able to reach out to anyone across the globe and be able to start a conversation on a topic you're interested about. Marcel also has a tremendous amount of learning opportunities. So if you wanted to learn, if you're a content strategist and you wanted to learn more about social strategy around program management, that's always open to you to do on your own. And then as we engage with our managers, you know, one of the things that we're also focusing on and we'll be launching this year is inclusive manager as coursework. We have absolutely already instituted things like a 3-part Disrupting Everyday Bias series and inclusive hiring and inclusive recruiting. But this builds on that so that managers are really understanding how to support talent on an identity basis. I think when we look at still the landscape of managers today, managers often become managers because they're good at their craft, not because they're good at managing people, and certainly not experts in navigating identity-based psychological safety, especially in hybrid working environments. So how are we supporting those managers? And part of that means listening and understanding talent in their needs to maybe shift and have mobility in the organization and what they're able to continue to contribute, no matter what the rationale is for the change that they might be seeking to make.
That's great. And it sounds like a really comprehensive platform for just keeping everyone engaged. Along similar lines there, and maybe this is the same program, but maybe you kind of go beyond this, is what practices have you observed for capturing the wisdom of older workers who have had more successes and more failures throughout their careers? And that question is coming from Steve Sosland.
I appreciate that question so much because again, it's It's the mix. I only regret that sort of my partner in this, one of the Sage's leads, Elizabeth Harris, had a conflict and wasn't able to be here today, because this is absolutely all done in partnership. I will say, first and foremost, it sounds like the most simple thing, but it is listening, but listening with the intent to both understand and act. So even the insights around the policy development that we're working towards for the end of this year came from exactly that, the insight that some talent felt like, I'm not sure if I want to raise my hand to say that I'm looking to retire, or I want a change, for fear of any stigma, or that maybe they would then be discounted as though they don't want to be here anymore, et cetera. So how do you have leaders, their teams, et cetera, understand like what does support for an individual who's making any sort of career shift or decision look like? And so we can definitely have conversations about it. We can do panels, but policies over panels all day long. And so it's that sort of listening and collaboration that sort of begets our ability to act accordingly.
Mm. And I know that you've recently joined our CDO board here at I4CP. And so maybe from your own experience and what you're hearing on that board, we have a question from Laura Quiones on what do you see as the biggest challenge for chief diversity officers in the coming 12 months? And how are you addressing that within your own organization?
I think it's continuing to navigate uncertainty. We again, if for anyone who has like any technology background, there's no P1s and P2s in this in terms of the prioritization. It absolutely all matters and has to be incorporated into your ongoing strategy. And there is the notion that it's obviously never all going to be perfect. But I think one thing that I continue to flag for organizations, and I think particularly in the industry of sort of advertising, marketing, et cetera, one of the toughest things about doing this work in this industry is navigating around a campaign mindset. And anyone who touches marketing in any way, I'm sure understands that in the work that we do, the narratives that we build, it's not always going to be a good story. And there has to be a lot of truth, trust, and transparency within your organization to figure out where those gaps are and how you collectively address them. One of those things I continue to call the representation retention paradox. And so whether it is older workers or women or people of color, organizations who are over focused on a number. I mean, in everything that we do, it's results based, no matter what industry you're in. So people often ask a CDO, what does good look like? And they reflect as good looking like a number or a quota, which is actually illegal in the US. But getting to that number doesn't necessarily address the experiences of talent. In fact, it can exacerbate the negative nature of experiences of talent in the organization. And then you can do irreparable brand damage. You will have bad experiences of talent. It will end up in litigation even, which is not a formidable business strategy. So it really is sort of paying attention to those things. But I think the biggest challenge is dealing with it all at once. In any given month, you can have a number of Heritage Month celebrations and also continued impact across a multitude of communities. I think the last thing I'll flag is, as we look at future of work and return to office, we have to be extremely mindful of not losing some of the things, the benefits that we've gained during COVID, maybe around accessibility or even share of voice. I've seen more quote unquote introverted personalities in this space win during this time, because you can take your microphone off mute, but in a room, it might be a lot more difficult for you to do, and you sort of exist in this more invisible space, and potential is very subjective. So how we navigate an inclusive future of work, revisiting real estate, where do we have gender neutral bathrooms? Where do we have wellness spaces? How are we leveraging technology to make sure that we're really meeting the needs of talent and continuing to recognize that whether it's parents or caregivers or members of the Jewish, Asian, Black community who still experience violence in especially larger metro areas and public transportation, how are you meeting the needs of talent? I've heard from a tremendous amount of women throughout the organization who have said, you know what, menopause at home has been great, thanks. And that needs to be a part of the conversation. So
Mhm.
It's the difficulty and the struggle is navigating it all at once.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think the quote that you shared, that potential subjective, is going to stick with me, and I'm sure with many of the people on this call. We are continuing to have questions flood in. Jackie, do you want to jump back into questions and save some of these chat questions for later, or should we continue?
No, let's continue. I only have a couple of more questions that I'm going to ask, and then I really want this audience to understand more around this older workers study. And Eric is going to take us through that. So by all means, this is about our audience. So let's take their questions first.
Fantastic. And Geraldine, you're just keeping the chat very lively. I think everything that you're sharing just launches a new set of questions. From Mariana Mancini, she had a question about how you're navigating restructuring that targets cost reduction without disproportionately affecting older workers.
So this becomes really individual conversation. We have about 34 brands, different, and when I say brands, I mean different agency brands across the organization. Everyone's at a different part of their journey across DE&I and every aspect of it. But leveraging the data that we have, building towards really robust dashboards that can look at things like time and title, tenure, supervisor hierarchy, and really being able to have the conversation with every part of their organization in terms of its specific contribution has been and continues to be really important. This conversation oftentimes has rested historically with the CTOs. CTOs are extremely important partners in this, but this is not just a CTO conversation. It's a CEO conversation, and really having a CMO conversation. It's a chief creative officer conversation. It's a chief financial officer conversation. It's really embracing the opportunity to have difficult conversations with leaders and how they're showing up. If a tough decision needs to be made, you absolutely have to pay attention to the impact. We also have a group global goal of 45% women in leadership, for example, by 2025. And so oftentimes when people organizations might have to make tough decisions and you're looking at cuts, you're looking at the more quote unquote big ticket salaries, or individuals that comes along with individuals who might be further along in career stage. And there is an overlap at times with that in terms of life stage as well. So if you're not paying attention to that impact, you absolutely are going to have that adverse effect, and what you lose in that short term in terms of the damage you're doing financially, long term, you're just really backloading risk.
Thank you. And then just a question coming in from, it sounds like one of our global members who's calling in from the Czech Republic. This is around different countries having different retirement ages. So in the Czech Republic, they have a fixed retirement age at 65. They're raising that to 68. But employability and also that perception of contribution after 60 is often viewed with concern and apprehension. And Philip is suggesting that sometimes it's bias, sometimes that has real base. And we're wondering what your thoughts on that were, if you had any additional insights.
Yeah. So Publicis Groupe, operating as a global organization, what we've done is it's difficult to have a global DE&I strategy. Our strategy globally really does fall into back to that notion of vive la différence, that our differences make us stronger. But what we've done is we have DE&I leads embedded in different regions, specifically with respect to that regional nuance, so that you can have a greater focus on what the sort of legislation and landscape is in that particular region. I think as things continue to shift along those age groups, we right now, like the study itself talks about individuals who are like 50 or 55. Our BRG is for those who are 45. It's really how you're engaging, I think, people and insights and how you're going to respond to it within your organization, even earlier in the conversation, and sort of planning accordingly, being more proactive around what those landscapes look like.
Carol from our research team had a follow-up question. Carol, did you want to come off of mute to just share a little bit more around that?
Thanks, Nina. I appreciate it. And hi, Geraldine. It's a pleasure to listen to your wisdom today. Thank you so much for being with us. I was just adding on a bit to the preceding question. And, you know, Publicis Group is such an enormous global presence. You know, I guess first, what are the changing perspectives across that footprint about older workers? Is it kind of difficult for you to I don't know, make some sort of a cohesive whole out of what you're doing in that area? And you know, how much does that global structure complicate what you're trying to do here?
Yeah, but by virtue of having the DE&I leads embedded in the different regions, it really combats that, because then we come together as part of a global DE&I council to bring our varied perspectives, but also still maintain respect to those nuances. I think when it comes to aging and looking at older workers, again, aging is something that is universal in that way. So when we look at things like this subject matter or how we navigate gender, even though there are nuances, it has to still be a part of that global conversation and the things that we connect on, even though it varies region by region. There is a significant amount of complexity, which I think the appreciation for that is why we will continue to operate that way, because there is no copy paste for any of this. The strategies and things that we might employ in the US, if we look at our partners in even LATAM or in MENA, it's not going to necessarily play out the same way. So what we can do, though, is talk about the shared experience of the talent experience and how talent are feeling about their experience based on their identity in the organization and what belonging actually looks like and how we address it.
Thank you for that. If I could just do one quick follow-up question, can you talk a little bit about how the idea of intersectionality fits into that?
Yeah, absolutely. Intersectionality in and of itself, and sometimes I think it can be misconstrued. We actually also have products within our organization. There's one in particular called Hyphen that comes out of one of our organizations called the Community, and it really focuses on all of the layers of who you are and how you show up as an individual. Initially, it was designed to be leveraged for looking at consumers and how to reach consumers, but there also is a tremendous amount of benefit in terms of individuals as talent and how you show up. Different identities in their layers have different experiences. And we recently were working through with a specific client in an oncology campaign. And we did some sessions. There was one in particular, Pharrell Williams had what's called the Mighty Dream Forum in Virginia. And it was really about how you focus on the differences of inequities in healthcare. So oncology and women's health is obviously an ongoing conversation, but this one was very specific to the Black community. And with this oncology campaign, the focus was really on letting women know that if you see certain signs at post-menopause, that it really is a sign of something serious. And how do you actually move women to go to the doctor and not ignore it? But in that conversation in of itself, what really unraveled is sort of the identity-based discrepancies in healthcare. So you're talking to women who are older and postmenopausal, but the notion of healthcare inequity for Black women and how it shows up and the believability of certain things, or whether it's even written off by a medical professional, unfortunately, like you have to have those additional layers of the conversation in order to really address the needs.
Thanks so much.
Right. At this point, I am really excited for you all to hear more about this older workers study findings. So I'm going to ask Eric to jump in and tell us a little bit more about that. So Eric, at this point, I'm going to pass it to you. Audience, continue to keep your questions coming. This has been a wonderful dialogue. So Eric, I'm going to pass it to you at this point so you can tell us a little bit more about this study's findings.
All right, thank you, Jackie. Hello, everyone. If we can slip, yeah, slide 10. And so this survey was headed up by my excellent colleague and I4CP Senior Research Analyst, Carol Morrison, who we just heard from. And Carol, please feel free to come off mute and help me with this as I go through the description if I get anything wrong. But one of the unique things about this survey is that this study is that it consisted of 2 surveys. One that went out to employers asking about the practices and perceptions of older workers, and one that went out to a group of 50+ workers who shared their current status and lived experiences in the workplace. This allowed us to gather both perspectives and examine the gaps between those 2 groups on several of the key questions that we asked. Now, one of the key findings from the survey that I wanted to share was based on this question, and that's that opportunities older workers offer and the risk of ignoring them are too often overlooked. So while many reporters purport to be age-friendly for workers, in practice, there's not really as many out there that are doing the actual practices to support that group. We see that only 6% have ERG, BRGs for employees 50+. Only 29% provide education and training to eliminate workforce discrimination. I found rather shockingly on this graph that we're seeing here that knowledge transfer program mechanisms to capture the know-how of older workers, we only had 21% of organizations that are doing that. I think that Steve Sussland's, that kind of goes back to what he was asking earlier a little bit about knowledge transfer. Carol, did you have anything from this particular slide that you like to highlight?
Yeah, I think you've just mentioned it. You know, that knowledge transfer program, yes, we need older workers to be actively involved in that, but it is a real business risk for organizations that don't take the initiative to set that up so that they do capture that knowledge and know-how. I think the other thing on here speaks to what Jackie mentioned early on about what an elite credential the age-friendly employer designation is. Geraldine will back up the fact that it's a very involved process that requires some really intense self-examination by organizations, but those that do that, like Publicis Groupe, certainly recognize the benefit of having a workforce that does mirror their customers, and this is a great way to really affirm the value of the older workforce as well. Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, and I think you and I both know and have talked before that just looking at the demographics globally, I know there's some countries that trend younger in Asia and Latin America, but in general, we're seeing that there's an older population and older workforce out there, and there's just going to be less workers in the future to choose from as a talent pool, and that engaging older workers and keeping them in the workforce longer kind of needs to be one of your strategies when you're doing your workforce planning.
Yeah.
All right, so I see we've got a few other great questions in chat. I don't know if we want to go back to those now, or Jackie, if you
Sure.
had some.
So one of the things that I was thinking about, Eric and Geraldine, you can both comment on this, is, you know, it becomes clear that the organizations that are focused on older workers are going to need to be able to balance the expense of older workers. And one of the products that we offer is a long-term care product. And it's a mobile product, so you can take it with you when you retire. But when you think about it, it absolutely defrays some of the expenses associated with I think what someone alluded to is, what if someone gets Alzheimer's or dementia, right? I mean, that's expensive. But if you have a product that is offered as a benefit by the company, such as this long-term care model, that can help defray some of the costs. And so I hear you, Geraldine, talking a lot about, making sure that there is a focus on well-being with older workers. So I'm curious about, does your organization look at specific benefit offerings around multi-generations? And if so, what do those look like?
It absolutely has to be in partnership with our benefits partners as well. So there is the constant sort of audit and looking at whether they're offering from Blue Cross Blue Shield or some of the things that you're talking about in terms of like longer term care.
Yeah.
One of the things that you mentioned, Alzheimer's and dementia, I do feel like that is a clear area of opportunity for organizations, ours included, to be able to start to navigate, because the care that's necessary when someone starts experiencing, we did sort of a memory cafe session with the Sages BRG recently, and it just even creating the space for people to be able to say like, hey, I feel like this is something that's happening to me more frequently that I'm comfortable with, et cetera. For me firsthand, I'm also a caregiver for my mom who has advanced Lewy body dementia. She's actually in the hospice stage of that now, but seeing that sort of transition for even her when when she initially decided to retire, coming out of a long career of creating restorative justice programs for youth, it was changing for her in many ways in terms of who she was and her identity and how she even showed up. And so when we see that and we don't necessarily have the space for talent to share that, I think that's definitely, I just wanted to pause for that for a moment. I think that's a clear opportunity. When we talk about the costs, though, in particular, I think there is and there can be some correlation in terms of costs, and some of it is just also a perception. I mean, if you look at also the loss of that knowledge, as well as still the costs that come along with the hiring process, it actually isn't as significant as I think we may think it is in terms of a cost risk.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
That's what I was going to bring up. Carol and I have discussed before how that sort of offsets, just the knowledge and experience of older workers can offset the perceived cost that's out there.
And I think there was a question that came through chat, and I briefly saw it, but how do you reconcile folks that are climbing in their careers with the perception that older workers are blocking their climb? How do you reconcile those two perspectives?
There's a lot of divisive perspectives to be had in this work in general, and that can definitely be one of them. And I think it goes hand in hand with also understanding and bringing in the perspectives of more junior level or younger talent, right? There has to be that sort of collaborative nature. And I think that's one of the reasons that the Cross BRG capacity, that panel of leaders coming together, has been really important in terms of how do we break down some of those barriers. I think conversely, I have actually seen individuals who are further along in their careers feeling pushed out, particularly in the advertising and marketing industry. The landscape has, I think, certainly changed from an age demographic standpoint. If you look at the things that were even showcased more typically in terms of like Mad Men or something like that, the landscape of who was in the room has absolutely changed. So I think it really comes down to having the conversation, but also back to the data. We have to keep ourselves honest and look at career trajectory and what cadence are we promoting individuals at, and how are we also providing the opportunity for new career opportunities. So someone who has a very senior title, if they're deciding that they want to sort of start over in a different capacity or take up a different career, and we hope that's with the organization, I think one of the things is really making sure that we are not missing out on the fact that you could be older in your life stage and still have a junior career title as well.
Appreciate that. And how do you market this? So for example, I know that, we can't discriminate based on age and a host of other factors, but do you proactively include some of the benefits in your DE&I statements of including age as part of those statements? How do you proactively do that, or do you nuance it and focus on multi-generations? Like, how do you do that?
We focus more on, we have an entire inclusive benefits track, like we have an inclusive future of work track as well. And that inclusive benefits track really focuses on how are we fostering belonging for all talent through our benefits. And we meet with our benefits talent partners and legal team throughout the year to make sure that we are always optimizing what the landscape of that looks like. And again, this is done in partnership with our BRGs, our Egalite BRG, for example, that supports our LGBTQI plus talent across the organization. We worked in partnership with the Egalite to create transition benefits and policies, which is one of the reasons why we continue to get a score of 100 on the HRC Corporate Equality Index.
Wow.
Without that, we wouldn't necessarily be able to achieve that. So it has to be done in partnership with the talent.
Wow. Okay. So at this point, Nina, I'm going to open it up for any additional questions that have come through on the chat. I have a couple of more questions to wrap up with Geraldine, but certainly want to check the audience and see if we have any other questions or comments.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely have a lot of comments coming through, and hopefully we'll see some connections come out of this call. I know a lot of people are eager to share some of the best practices that they're seeing. One of the questions I did want to surface through was kind of balancing the difference between having countries or populations where there are large youth populations, and how do you balance that with keeping folks that are in that older age bracket? How are you going to balance those competing interests for career development?
Yeah, I think it still goes back to the connected conversation and that knowledge transfer, and having that knowledge transfer happen in a multitude of ways. You certainly cannot overlook the experience gained and the wisdom and discernment that comes from individuals who have longer standing careers, as well as the benefits of new insights and strategies. Again, focused on our industry, the ways in which we need to be particular about mirroring the consumer market. The same talent that we have in our organization need to be the individuals in the reflection of the market who are pouring into the work, so that we're also connecting in salient ways with the consumer and really doing the best work for our clients. I will say that when it comes to how we're showing up in the business, this is one area we recently had. When you think about the workplace to marketplace strategy, we recently had some insights that came from the BRG in regards to just marketing in general. So how are certain, I won't name the client, but how are certain clients looking at the targeting in a meaningful way of individuals based on life stages and changes. So if your hair texture is changing or your skin texture is changing, how are you leveraging the actual insights of individuals to be able to really address that? And when we're doing work for clients, the BRGs can also step in, given their identity, and share those insights real time as we're developing products and initiatives, media, to be able to show up the right way.
Thank you, Geraldine. And Jackie, I know you have a couple questions and we only have a few more minutes left. So thanks again to the audience for sharing so many incredible questions and thoughts today in the chat. We're really grateful to have you all here and for you to share your thoughts and opinions.
Absolutely. And Geraldine, I have one closing question for you. And by the way, this has just been delightful. I just want to say, first of all, thank you for coming as a guest speaker today to share your insights and just how you're leading the way in regard to this. And so my question for you is, what's the one lesson, maybe it's more than one, but what's the one lesson you've learned from your commitment to the presence of older workers in your workplace that you would share with your peers on this call today?
I think it's the word that I just used. We talk about wisdom and we talk about knowledge transfer. The thing that we don't always focus on is very specifically discernment. there is something that comes along with wisdom about how to navigate across people and challenges, and what I always frame is like great grace and gratitude
Yes.
that comes from having deep interaction and understanding, listening and experiencing what talent who have been in this industry for a long time have to offer. And really hoping that, you know, as we continue to move along, that we really never lose that. And I think for every individual that we are partnering with, whether a person is looking at retirement or shifting, how are we really making those profiles and that existence more robust to include all of a person's skill sets, whether the ones that the organization has been leveraging to date or things that they want to learn, and fostering that learning. So really keeping just an sort of open mind, heart, spirit in this space, and really engaging at those deeper levels, with 27, close to 27,000 people in the US, nearly 100,000 people globally. There definitely is the need to make time, even outside of the BRG landscape, to have individual conversation, and definitely keeping space on my calendar to hear from talent individuals who reach out, whether it's because they're having a good experience or because they're not. That's where a lot of the insights come from, really that raw, organic conversation being really. So that, I think that's been one of the biggest lessons. That data and insights and dashboards are amazing. The true sentiment in a safe space goes a long way.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Very sage wisdom indeed, I think, for all of us. So thank you so much. At this point, Eric, do you have any closing slides that you'd like to share with this group in the next couple of minutes?
I do not.
Okay.
I would just like to say thank you, Geraldine. That was amazing. Really appreciate all the insights.
Yes, it was. Yeah, the chat was blowing up for sure, Eric. Geraldine, again, thank you so much. And I could not be more proud that you are now a member of our I4CP CDO board. So thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you again in the very near future. Thank you, audience, all of you who joined us today. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week, and you'll join us for future calls. So thank you so much.